Welcome to Book Me, Conversations with Writers, sponsored by Nimbus Publishing and Arts Nova Scotia. Today, our host, Costas Halavrezos, will be speaking with Len Wagg.
Photographers wrestle with a lot of things at once, and I'm not talking about their camera equipment. Most importantly, there's light, which refuses to stop changing. There's the search for the best angle to use to create a fresh perspective on their subject. And they wrestle with time itself, often measured in thousandths of a second, as they try to capture an image to share with us. Len Wagg is a champion wrestler of all those things. His photographs have appeared in Maclean's, Time magazine, and the New York Times. In 2008, Len won the Mayor's Award for Excellence in Book Illustration for Wild, Nova Scotia, his photographic portrait of the province's protected areas. He's published 4 Nova Scotia-themed books with Nimbus. In his latest, Nova Scotia from the Air, he gives us a bird's-eye view of the province through aerial photographs paired with archival images. And he's my guest today on Book Me. Len, welcome.
Great to be here.
How old were you when you knew you were going to be taking pictures for a living?
I don't really know when I realized that. I don't know if I've realized that yet or not, but I believe I am. I think it was when I started in my early 20s. I graduated from the vocational school in the photography program, which is now NSCC, and I got to join this upstart little newspaper called the Halifax Daily News. And in the first 6 months, I had photographed the Queen, the Pope, been on a tall ship, and flown in the snowbirds. So I said, this is a pretty good gig. I should stick with it.
Stick with this. And they pay you for it.
And they pay me for it.
Now, I mentioned the thousandths of a second that matter when you're trying to get an image of something or someone moving fast. But your 2015 book, Then and Now, was dealing with a timeline of decades. Tell us about that.
It was. I looked through, I was at the Nova Scotia Archives looking through images one day, and I saw this collection, and it was on the virtual archives, and it was, an icon of Nova Scotia, Walsall McCaskill. And people who don't know his photography, just put your hand in your pocket, pull out a dime, and you'll know his photography.
The Blue Nose.
You look at that. The Blue Nose is on it, the original one. So I started looking at that, and it was an amazing thing when you start to look at back in the 1920s, 1930s. A lot of us have seen McCaskill's photos, and we don't even know we're looking at McCaskill's photos. But this guy and his wife, who was also a photographer, both of them, they almost gave a visual identity to Nova Scotia, to who we are, because the way they captured the province. And I looked at that and I thought, maybe I should go back and take a look at this. Originally I wasn't a fan of the whole then and now genre, but when you start it and you go down that bunny hole, you can't get out of it because it's fascinating to see, what was there once and what's not there now, or what was there once and now what's there even more.
McCaskill is best known, though, as a great marine photographer. There is that iconic Blue Nose photograph, of course, but he shot a lot more than that.
He did. He traveled around, well, not only Nova Scotia, but he traveled around the world. And in fact, he was one of the first non-Brit to win the Royal British Photography Prize. So his work, he won hundreds of prizes. And when you think of a guy from St. Peter's, Nova Scotia, goes to Sydney, moves to Halifax, and then, we have the Halifax explosion that happens. He's a photographer documenting that. Really, it was a fascinating life that he had.
Now, you tried to stand where McCaskill had stood when you took your shots. What was your process from doing that? You were working from his photographs and the perspectives that he was framing. So tell us about some of the things that were going through your mind, because some of the places you were standing that he stood didn't exist anymore.
Exactly. So I would start out, I think I had 300 images. And so I said, okay, 300, that looks good. So I'm going to start and I'm going to go and see what I can find. And sometimes where, you were standing in this rolling field and you would see farmhouses and a lake in the distance, I'd find that spot and I'd be in a forest Because, like when you look at 100 years ago in Nova Scotia, a lot of it was just farmland. And it was very individual farms. It wasn't kind of industrial farms. It was, so you would go there and you would look and say, okay, that doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't make a picture. Or in other places you'd go. So you'd have to be a little bit of a sleuth, and you'd start to look for roof lines, and you'd look for, roads, and you look for rivers and and you try and find those bends, and, things change. But some things stay the same. So once you found something, you could start to build. And it wasn't only the physical things that you look at, but then you look at the camera lens that he had. Like, what was he shooting with? Was he shooting with a large format camera, which are different than the cameras that I'm shooting with now? The different perspectives of different lenses give you different ideas. So in some cases where, a wide angle lens getting what he had, well, maybe he was using a different camera. It kind of crammed things together instead of, pushing them apart. So those subtle differences were something that I really kind of had to start looking at.
I remember going to a presentation by the great New Brunswick and world photographer Freeman Patterson one time. He commented about things like that. He says, before we had telephoto lenses, we had these, and he pointed down to his feet, which is his approach. You walk up to the thing if you want.
Exactly. You walk closer. Yeah.
Now, in your introduction to that book, you raise a really interesting question, I think. Whether McCaskill was reflecting, quote, the spirit of who Nova Scotians are, or who they are to the rest of the world. What were you thinking about there?
What I was thinking about is when you look at how we're known, is it just something that people see us as, when they see us as blue nosers, or they see us as, descendants of Scots or things like that? You think, are we known that way because, McCaskill went around and photographed those communities, where he photographed? Are we known as a province of quaint little fishing villages because those are the images that you see of Nova Scotia? So, when you look at that time that McCaskill was around, that visual identity almost, did it come from him? Did he reflect it, or did he create it? So when you look at McCaskill, he was a sailor. In 1920s, 1930s, you didn't jump on the 101 and head to Advocate Harbor. That was a long ways away. So did he sail around? And in that case, he would have sailed from port to port to port. And, of course, with the cameras his size, he would have, again, you had to carry them around. So would he photograph the ports? And thus we became known as a province of ports, which we are in some places, but of course, obviously, we all know that we're much more than that. Mm-hmm. And that was something that I kept kind of thinking about as I was working on that project. Is, did he go somewhere to photograph something that he knew of, or because he went there to photograph that place, did it become known?
Tell us about McCaskill's photo known as Kingdom by the Sea at Ferguson's Cove, and why it became almost monumental.
It was one of those, it's the boy and the girl, and they're walking down the road. The lens, you're looking through it. It's a magical moment with the light and with the soft focus of it, and the way the trees came in. I was standing there and I was photographing, and because I had a little boy and a girl that were roughly the same age, and I was photographing them. And a gentleman came out of his house and he said, "I know what you're doing." And anyway, he went back in and he came back out and he had the picture, The Kingdom by the Sea, which is the little boy and girl walking down the road hand in hand. And he said to me, "Did you give the boy a nickel?" And I said, "No, I didn't." "Why?" He said, "Well," he said, "when McCaskill took that picture, the little boy wouldn't hold the little girl's hand. So he gave him a nickel to hold her hand." And I said, "That's a great story." And he said, "This was my wife's favorite picture from that collection." And of course, McCaskill lived on Ferguson's Cove Road. So that was, people would see him doing a lot of his work there.
Wondering about the strange connection of McCaskill and coins, the nickel, the blue-nosed dime. Who knew?
Coming back.
Let's move on to another one of your books. You set yourself a real challenge with Nova Scotia at night because photographers need light.
Exactly. I try not to do the same thing over and over again, and that's part of it. One of the things that if you do the same thing over and over again, you become bored. But the other thing is it's challenging. I think in order to grow, you need to challenge yourself and you need to step out of your comfort zone and try and get things, to keep an interest. Because, when you've been in the career for a long time, you want to be fresh. You don't want to just sit on your laurels. You want to be, and so that's one of the things that I looked at is that, let's see what I can do at night.
Now, in that book, you illustrate that the camera can see things at night that we can't. Can you give us an example?
The Northern Lights, are a great example of what you see. So when we go out at night, we have the rods and cones in our eyes. And
well, tell us about the rods and cones now for people.
Well, when I start talking about rods and cones, I'm going to have somebody coughing because they're going, you got that wrong. They always get it backwards. But, part of us, we perceive color. And part of the eye perceives light. And when you go out at night, just as your eyes start to get adjusted to the darkness, your perception of color lowers, but your perception of light increases. So that's why, after you've been walking out on a country road for 45 minutes, you can see better. But you can't see the colors. And one of the things about, either film or your digital is that they don't need any change. They see the colors that you see. So, yeah, but don't get me wrong, when you see the Northern Lights, you see them. They really come out. But then as you start looking at them, you start to perceive them better the longer you're in them. And so one of the things that happens is that initially when you look at it, you're not seeing it with the bright, vibrant colors that are really there. But when you look at your camera and when you look at the final image, they're there. So it really is.
They didn't take any adjusting. The camera didn't.
No, the adjusting was all done by nature.
In your prologue to Nova Scotia at Night, you talk about the sense of wonder you had as a child watching the lightning hit the ocean from your bedroom window, and how that sense of wonder remains for you in spite of technology and so on. Can you explain what sense of wonder means to an adult like yourself?
I spent a lot of time when I did my book on the wilderness. I spent in that 1 year period. I spent about 100 days in the woods. Not all at once, but I spent about 100 days in the woods. And when you're in the woods and all the noise is gone, the noise of technology, the noise of engines, the noise actually of straight lines. And when you think about that, the noise of concrete buildings, when all that's gone. And you look and you start to feel, it's a really primal feeling. And I think when you start to push away all the pressures that we have of everyday life and you get back to where we came from, that sense of wonderment comes back because you start to feel a lot of those, a lot of the things, the baggage that we have starts to go away. As a job of a photographer is, you're alone a lot. And so maybe you start thinking things that aren't there, but but you're alone a lot and you start thinking about a lot of these things and that sense of wonderment grows. You realize that we really do live in an amazing location in this part of the globe.
And when you're out there, you're not checking your cell phone every few seconds.
You're not. And that's a really good point because what I found a few years ago is when you do have cellular connection, when you're out there, your work isn't as good as when you don't.
Because in a way, you're not really out there, you're somewhere else.
Right, because people don't realize how easy it is to disconnect from where you are with one of your cellular devices. You totally disconnect from your location and just go into this technological world that we're working with. But when you turn it off, you begin to reconnect. So now it's kind of part of my standard operating procedure that when I want to go out there, I want to click, it's off. And I just connect with what I'm doing. And it was funny because I found it was a real difference.
Bingo, you get the sense of wonder back.
It comes back.
Now, we're told a picture speaks 1,000 words. Considering your latest book, Nova Scotia from the Air, what picture tells the richest story, do you think, and why? It might be different for different people, but for you, for Len Wagg.
The new book that I have, and again, like I said earlier, I didn't want to be that then and now guy, but I'll tell you a funny story. I started looking at this collection that was done by Richard Macaulay in 1931. The fifth photo in that collection was my house in Parsboro.
Really?
So my house was built in 1920s. And I go through and I'm in now photo number 15 or 20. And it was a farmhouse that I worked at when I was 12 in the Annapolis Valley. And I thought, I can't not do this. This is just saying, just come on, let's go. So when you think that 1931, a guy flies by a farm that I was working on when I was 12, and I wasn't 12 in 1931, but a guy flies by and he takes that picture, and then, here I am 90 years later looking through and I find it. It's got to be, it's an omen. It's an omen. I have to go do it. So
I think we tend to forget how long aerial photography has been around.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's been 1909 is when, in Ben Bray, when Alexander Graham Bell and Douglas McCurdy first flew in the, in Canada, the British Empire, whatever, it was all around the same time after Kitty Hawk. It was then that it really started.
Mm-hmm. And now we have drones.
Now
tell us about your modus operandi, though, for this book, for the current aerial photographs.
So for the current aerial photograph, the book that I'm working on, I did it in 3 ways. One is I fly. I started flying when I was a kid, when I was 14, flying gliders. And I've always had this sense that whenever I get in a commercial airline or whatever, I get in the window and I look down I'll look down the entire flight, just looking for shapes, designs, and see how the geography moves and how people move with the geography. And so in this one, I've gone with powered aircraft. So I've gone with the helicopters, a lot of work in choppers, because it's a very, I wouldn't say economical, but it's a very easy way to do things, that you can go from point to point to point. This is the angle, this location, stop here, shoot it, move on to the next location. And I have brought in, and there's one photo in this that is the new technology of, people say drones. That is the common phrase word, but to me, drones suggest something autonomous, when in fact it isn't, because, you put this unmanned airplane, you put it up there in the location you want, you take the picture. So it's the gray matter that kind of does it, but there's photos in there that are drone, because you have to move with the technology.
And you've been through several changes just in your career in technology. Exactly. I mean, going from film to digital.
Going from film to taking film and digitizing it to then shooting it digitally. Yeah, it's changed a lot.
Now, you have viewed Nova Scotia's most remote areas. You've viewed it through a historical lens, in the so-called dark, and most recently from the air. You were shooting current events for the Daily News back in the day. What's next?
What's next? What's next is I don't know what's next.
Oh,
and it's funny.
Good place to be.
It is funny. I don't know. I've got a couple of ideas, and but I wanna go somewhere that I haven't gone before, and that and that leads me to think I want to sit down. I want to let the creative juices kind of start to boil and see where I can go.
Len Wagg, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Photographer Len Wagg has published 4 Nova Scotia-themed books with Nimbus: Wild Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia Then and Now, Nova Scotia at Night, and most recently, Nova Scotia from the Air. Book Me is produced by Robin Grant, and Lynn Fox makes it sound fantastic. I'm Costas Halavrezos. Now, let's go read.